For our brothers who are on the Zoom, we will be starting shortly, inshallah. Just another 2-3 minutes, and we will start our professorial lecture today, inshallah. Just bear with us another 2-3 minutes. Let me welcome also Professor Jasir Auda, our professor who is here with us today. Professor Osman Bakar also, and Professor Tamim, and all the professors who are there on the Zoom platform. Welcome you all. We are starting shortly. Screen, okay? His lecture on the screen, okay? But it doesn't appear there later on. Okay. Not Prof. Okay. 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 Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Good afternoon and good evening to all the participants who are attending today the Istac-World Professorial Lecture number 26. First of all, let's welcome our Professor George Norghoff to ISTAC, the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, International Islamic University, Malaysia. We are very much honored to have Professor Norghoff with us here today. And I would like also to welcome all the professors, lecturers, doctors, brothers and sisters, those who are with us here at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, and those who are following on the YouTube channel and also the Zoom platform. Welcome to the 26th Istac-World Professorial Lecture, which will be delivered by our Professor George Norghoff. Before I hand over to Professor Norghoff, I would like to put you in the context of our lecture today. As you are aware, we have started this Istac-World Professorial Lecture 2 years ago, and today we are having the 26th World Professorial Lecture. These lectures delivered by great scholars, great leaders, great researchers, ambassadors, prime minister. One of them was the Prime Minister of Japan, the late Prime Minister, who presented a lecture also in this platform. We invited scholars and ambassadors and researchers and experts from different disciplines, brothers and sisters. You remember the World Professorial Lecture number 19 was delivered by Professor K-Yang Cheng, who is with us here today. And Professor, in his lecture then, he referred many times to the ideas and views of Professor George Norghoff. So today we have the student and the professor. And it's your great opportunity here to share and exchange ideas and views in one of the most important topics and issues of more interest and merit in our academic circles and also in the public. Brothers and sisters, let me introduce to you our scholar today. Professor George Norghoff is a philosopher, neuroscientist, and psychiatrist, holding degrees in all three disciplines. Originally from Germany, he was recruited to head up the mind, brain, and neuroethics research unit at the Royal Institute of Mental Health Research, affiliated with the University of Ottawa. Dr. Norghoff researches the relationship between the brain and mind in its various facets, focusing on the neural and biochemical mechanisms related to higher order mental functions like consciousness and self in both healthy people and in those with such mental illnesses as depression and schizophrenia. The question driving me, he says, is why and how can our brain construct subjective phenomena like self-consciousness and emotions? Dr. Norghoff is one of the leading figures in linking philosophy and neuroscience and is the author of 260 journal articles and 15 books, including Neurophilosophy and the Health Mind, 2016, Norton publication, New York. He says, how did I come to non-reductive neurophilosophy? Let me sketch my biography a little. When I was young, I always wanted to study philosophy, the basic questions of the world, humans, and the mind fascinated me, going down to the bottom of things. However, I did not want to study philosophy in isolation from the science. My fascination was and still is on the mind, and specifically subjectivity as core feature of the mind. Subjectivity and mind are obviously key topics in philosophy. However, having grown up from the mid-end of the 20th century allowed me to also study the mind empirically, and thus to complement philosophy by science. And my time there were no neuroscience programs yet, hence the only way to study the brain and its connection to the mind was to go into medicine, which I did parallel to my philosophy studies. So brothers and sisters, this is our scholar today, and this is the professor who will be delivering our 26th Istac-World Professorial lecture on a topic, what the brain can tell us about the mind and its culture. So welcome our professor, Professor Norghoff, go ahead.
What do I need to do here?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for the nice intro. Okay. So then one more thing, I need to just push you the PowerPoint, right? Yeah, that's all? Yeah. And then make it large. Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for the nice invitation and introduction. And I had to smile at something what I wrote was cited here, so I need to be careful what I write. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. It's a wonderful ambiente, and I'm really impressed. Thank you very much. So I will tell you something about brain and mind, obviously, given my, whoops, don't steal my presentation here. Yeah. So, yeah, I know, for the online people, yeah. Should work. Okay. By the way, this one can also go away. This is always a problem. Then sometimes the online people, yeah, okay, you know this. Okay, thanks. Yeah, sorry for the short delay. So I will talk to you obviously about transition from brain and mind. And you see already the way I formulate the question has a certain connotation. Those who are familiar in Western philosophy would not say for the transition or transformation from brain to mind, but they would say how the mind maps upon the brain. So that's a slight conceptual difference. However, so the main thing is here, and you also saw that I slightly changed the title, because from brain to mind, spatial temporal neuroscience and philosophy. So, and again, I said, how can such, I mean, the brain, when you see it, it's a gray mass, and just for your delight or for your dismay, it's 98% water. Yeah, so, but nevertheless, it does a certain job, like me making able to speak here. And the question is, how does it really transform this neuronal activity into mental activity? That's the key question here. And keep in mind the way I formulate the question. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer in the 19th century said it's a gray pipey device. I added the gruesome. So I think that really sketches as well. And despite all research and fascinating progress in the last 20, 30, 40 years in brain research, and you see all the stories in the Western media, and we found this region and this cognitive function, we don't really yet understand why neuronal activity transforms into mental activity. And let me sketch you just the question. Look at water. You know that water, of course, you know, particularly probably when you're from Canada, you know that water has an icy state, has fluid state, and a vapor and steam, and they transform into each other. And when you were not knowing that that is the H2O in all three states, you would say these are three different substances. So water, H2O, the chemical formula, is shared / the common currency between those three states. And that exactly we don't, that link connection we don't, thank you very much, between neuronal and mental states. We just don't know, despite all progress. And that's where I offer you at least some ideas. So, and obviously that's also, you see, it's a question which touches strongly upon philosophical issues, like what is the concept of mind and brain, and also empirical issues. And you will see this in my talk. So why doesn't current, particular Western science and philosophy doesn't get there? What is my idea? This is often discussed as a hard problem of consciousness, David Chalmers, because from my point of view, they just sketch the surface, and you see the first surface of the iceberg. That's where you see above water level. And then they link that to emotion, cognition, and so on and so on, but you cannot find consciousness or other mental features like sense of self. So for that, from my point of view, you need to go deeper, to beyond, beneath the water level, and you see the iceberg metaphor. So I will use the iceberg metaphor as a template for my talk. I will come up throughout, because I think it's really what I'm trying to present you both neuroscientifically and philosophically is going to these deeper layers. What's going on? So, and one thing which goes on there is time. Very simple. So time, you will see, is for me absolute essential. Just came out, a book of mine came out for broader audience, short, surprisingly for me, only 100 pages short for broader audience, neurowaves. And that's setting really the theme here. Waves, the brain can be characterized by waves, and these waves are key for transforming neuronal into mental activity. Meaning your mental activity, like your consciousness or self, also consist in terms of waves. Very simple. Look to the ocean, it's not far from here. And you see big waves, you see small waves, and that similar things in the brain. I will say that. So that leads to what called is dynamics. Dynamics is a branch of physics originally, and you can see a lot of fantastic research on time, and basically dynamics is the changes over time. I added the patterns because there are certain patterns. Look, when you go here to the seaside, you see big waves and small waves. And often you see the small waves, they're fast, and the slow waves, obviously the big waves are slow and very powerful. And often they're also nested within each other. The smaller, faster waves come with the bigger waves. They're integrated. And so that's a certain temporal structure, a pattern of change. And you can measure that. Their physics has a lot of ways of measuring that, and that's what we do. And you can also describe it subjectively. When you ask people, for instance, depressed patients, very severely depressed patients, they often have the feeling that the really terrible thoughts of despair, that like big waves coming, you sense the big wave is coming, and you cannot escape, and you're doomed to fail. Despair, as one recent patient just last week told me. Yeah, and they describe it, and of course, very powerful. Yeah. So that's dynamics, and it's a time series. You can see this here when you deconstruct. You have that looks chaotic. The changes over time. For instance, when I move here, I don't know whether the online people can see this. Here, create different movements over time, and your brain will follow my movements of my hand, for sure. I will tell you why. So, and that is really important. That's, for me, spatial temporal patterns, and I will describe that a little bit more, are really key. So you see already what current neuroscience and also philosophy does is really in the upper part there in what is called social neuroscience, sensory-motor affective. But however, there's a deeper layer, remember the deeper parts of the iceberg. That's what I call spatial temporal neuroscience, and and also philosophy. And that's the global background. That's really a background. And I don't need to tell you, you cannot understand the foreground without the background. Yeah, if you want to understand this room, you need to understand the shape of this room. You need to understand the whole building. If you want to understand the building, you need to understand the whole context. If you want to understand the campus, you need to understand the whole landscape in this area, and so forth. You see, it's nested within each other. Same, our brain is just one part of this chain of nestedness. And that we need to understand, that's key for mental features. So even the notions of background and foreground are relative. Yeah, what is background now might be foreground for an even larger background, and so on and so forth. So that's key, this kind of notion. I just give you, even if you don't understand the details, because you have a different disciplinary background, just keep these basic principles in mind. And you see, I refer to basic principles in nature often, and I apply them to the brain. So, and you can see, I don't want to go into detail, but my determination. So usually when you hear about the brain, very special, yeah. And then you say, oh, it's the most complex organ in nature. That's why we can't understand. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, okay. But that's another judgment. I don't know nature well enough to really say that the brain is the most complex organ in nature. And second, when you hear about the brain, or you see there's a region, now a network, IHIP, and you see, oh, a certain frequency. Yeah, but that's, for me, not what the brain is about. For me, the brain is about, again, go to the seaside, you see all these different waves. The brain is just a collection of different waves which constantly change in their pattern and in their dynamic. But in that pattern, there's a certain temporal structure. So again, and also and that allows also the brain to integrate in the context. So you will see this, and that's what I mean by spatial temporal neuroscience and also later philosophy. So, important side note, what do I mean by time? So time is for me continuous change, because if there's no change, the time stands still. And if that is the case in your brain, you're seriously depressed. Because that's like a flat ocean where there's no wave at all, and everything stands still, and there's absolutely no change, and you need to come to me as a psychiatrist. seriously. And yeah, so that's the worst. And that's literally what happens in the depressed people's brain. So meaning the brain has its own inner time and space. That's very important. It continuously constructs its own inner waves. And the notion, interestingly, of inner time and space versus outer time and space in the world goes back to Immanuel Kant, philosopher in Germany in the 18th century, in the Critique of Pure Reason, Transcendental Aesthetics. So, and that's where you can really learn. So when I read all this, of course, I learned my lesson, and I have published papers on Immanuel Kant and the brain. So, and that stands in contrast to what current neuroscience tells you, because for neuroscientists, often time and space are just, you have to perceive the outer time and space, but the brain itself is basically a black box. That has his historical origins in behaviorism at the 20th century, is still somewhat late. So here we say, look, there's a construction view that the brain has its own inner time, and it's continuously matching with the outer time. I give you an example. When you listen to music, you spontaneously tap your fingers, or you can't see my foot, so I don't want to put the foot now here on display. So you spontaneously tap with that. Unconscious. Your brain does the job for you. Why? Because basically the brain adapts its own inner rhythm to the rhythm of the music. And it's quite ingenious how the brain does it. It's incredible. Yeah, it participates in the outer time of the music by adapting its own inner time to that. So it makes use of the physical time. And that's by itself remarkable, but even more remarkable is that you say, when you tap the rhythm of the music, you feel a groove. You feel great. You have a feeling. You feel synchronized. And I will later show you slides that synchronization is essential. Your brain wants to synchronize. When I now talk, and you see I'm a lively speaker, at least I think so. If you were have me freely walking, I would here walk all the time back and forth. But I know I can't do this because of the Zoom and the mic. So, so then you would follow automatically my movements. So when I do this now, I'm sure that your regions in the brain and also your motor regions will follow my movements. Why? It will adapt its own rhythm to that. Because why? Because by that, your brain is able, by adapting to my timing of my movements, your brain will be able to decipher what I mean. What the guy is talking about, I have no idea. I cannot follow all these crazy movements. Yeah, but if I were giving a certain structured movement, now you do these movements, you will say, oh, maybe Norghoff is developing something and trying to convey the message. That's why I do this. Yeah. So in that your brain knows, because it has seen these kind of temporal patterns in the past, they were associated with that meaning. Maybe there's some cultural differences here, obviously. I will come back to that later. But then you say, Norghoff is meaning that. And then Norghoff will tell you, no, I meant something completely different. Okay, that's a joke. Yeah, so, but it tells you how important timing patterns changes. So now you say, and those patterns are shared between brain and mind. And I will show you later concrete examples of that. But here I find basically, what is the link? How do they communicate? We communicate in English. You speak English, I speak English. That is our common language / common currency. If I were speaking German and you were speaking Malay, we would not communicate, we wouldn't share it. So this is what I'm after here. And because we share the language, we can exchange ideas. Even if we don't always understand each other, but then we need to ask for the meaning of the terms, but that we can communicate, we can exchange. Same neuronal, mental, and environmental features. So, and here I go back, beautiful quote by Nikola Tesla. I'm sure you know the Tesla car. And when you look at the biography, Google for Nikola Tesla, you know why Elon Musk named his car Tesla, because both persons seem to be equally brilliant and eccentric. So if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, vibration. And you already saw that the way I explained the wave, when you have the feeling, oh, now I understood something, that's probably a bigger wave in your activity changes in the brain. Yeah, so it's basic pattern of nature, which I'm alluding to. Music is a beautiful example of different ways how they interact with your brain. Yeah, and if your brain is too slow, you will probably not like fast music. Yeah, if your brain is already too fast, you want to have slow music. Yeah, because it calms you down, makes you less anxious. We exploit this therapeutically these days in anxiety patients. So that's what we see. These kind of basic time-space dynamic phenomena provides a link between brain and mind. That makes it possible that neuronal activity transforms into mental activity. Another example, if this talk, I've got another brain guy, he talks about the brain, blah, 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 and you feel bored. Now, sorry that you feel bored already. You have to endure me another 45 minutes. So if you continue feeling bored, these 45 minutes will feel, oh God, the guy talked 3 hours. Yeah? So that's what will happen. Though it's only 45 minutes. Why? Because your brain has its own inner time and it doesn't like what Norghoff talks. Yeah? So that's what it is. It's a mismatch. Yeah? That's why you have this subjective phenomena. So I think I already indicated that clear time and space, and I will give you also for the space some examples later. It's a common currency of brain and mind. And that's really a new approach. And I could also widen that. You will see that towards the end of my talk, it's not only the common currency, the shared feature between brain and mind, but also between world, brain, and mind. So that's basically spatial temporal neuroscience and also philosophy that provides an integrated brain-mind model. So now I want to give you some example. I was talking a lot about time. Now I give you a little bit about space. And that leads me to the self. The self, interestingly, in the Western tradition, is often considered, can I use the mouse here? Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. The self is often considered the highest cognitive phenomenon up here. The self, you're aware of everything. It's a higher order cognitive feature up here. And of course, only humans have a self, no animals, because we are the highest species and we are so different and endowed with special capacities as distinct from all other creatures. And that's the self is, of course, the pinnacle of all of that, often considered here. However, I say, look, the self is down here, very down here. Why? It's one of the most fundamental functions of the brain and its relation to the environment, because it creates this continuous relationship to body and world. And that's exactly what you see, for instance, here in the iceberg. Yeah, the iceberg, that's here, it directly interfaces with the water. That's what I later call world-brain relationship. So now let me show you some examples how that fits with the self. So I show you some empirical examples of the self. First, then how the self interfaces with the world. That's where the culture comes in. And then after that, I will show you a little bit the philosophical implications for the mind-body/world-brain. So what is the self? So interestingly, when you look, you have different facets of self. Has been a lot discussed in current neuroscience and psychology. There's a mental self, it's about all your thoughts and your cognitions. Then you have also an outer bodily self, here your outer body self. And then you have also an interoceptive self, your inner body. When you have a good meal, here's a good Malay food or the fruit which I just enjoyed here very much. So then you feel your stomach. So it's your inner body. So you have different facets of yourself. And we were asking ourselves whether these different facets of the self have also a basis within the brain itself. So meaning that they occupy sort of different regions, different networks. And indeed, this is a larger meta-analysis of all kinds of brain imaging studies on the self. And you can see that, for instance, your inner body self has these regions, the outer body self, called exoceptive, has these regions, and then the mental, your cognition, thinking about your own self, has these regions. And when you look in detail, you see that some of the regions overlap. They recapitulated in the next layer. So there's a partial overlap between the regions of the layers. It's very interesting. is sort of what is called a nested organization, and that's what I showed here. What is a nested organization? So you have the regions of the inner body, and then they are recapitulated with the region plus additional regions in the outer body, and then recapitulated again on the mental level plus additional regions. So this compares to here the Russian dolls, nested organization. Yeah, the same shape, different sizes. So same regions are recapitulated, different sizes, additional regions. And of course, the Chinese can do it much better than the Russians. Don't tell the Russians. They have this beautiful crystal ball, and there are, I don't know, 1,000 crystal balls. And this is crazy. One of my Chinese students, after she saw that, she said, no, Georg, you need to show this one. So now I show both. And it's incredible, these fine-grained little balls in there, and they're all nested within each other. So, and that's interestingly, the same happens in the topographic or spatial organization of the brain. And that's very important. Why? Because when I have a mental state, I have a certain thought, I also have a feeling in my inner body. Yeah, we all know this. I have a certain thought, or this make my stomach rumbling. Yeah, or the other way, when your stomach rumbles, you also impact your thought. And that's probably this kind of organization. Or in anxiety patients, they have all these racing thoughts. It's absolutely, they all tell me that. They cannot control, and they race between past and future, and they're never in the present moment, anxiety patients. And they always rumble between past and future, and they want to predict, but they're completely uncertain. And that in turn then transforms into anxiety with all kinds of somatic and bodily symptoms, as we say. So here you see it's an explicit spatial and also then dynamic interpretation of anxiety. So why is, for instance, these three layers of self important? Because the relationship between these three layers of self can change. And that's, for instance, you see in depression. This is what we did in this study. So here, the relationship of these three layers or networks of self relative to the whole brain change. So in depression, what we showed in this study, I don't want to go into detail here, that in depression, the mental self and the extroceptive regions were abnormally strong. So you can see this here, for instance, particularly here, that too much activity in the mental self regions relative to the other layers of self. And that makes sense that what you see in these patients, you see an abnormal cognition and what is called rumination in these patients. Their thoughts are constantly ongoing and they cannot stop it. So imagine you're in the ocean and the waves are coming one after another and all these big waves come. That's exactly how a depressed patient feels. And of course, when you're there in the ocean and all these waves and you endure this for half an hour, at some point you become completely frustrated and despair and see no escape and you see a future gloom. That's exactly what happens in depression. When I talk here about depression, I mean the really severe depression, which leads you to me as a psychiatrist. So, and interestingly, on the empirical side, this is interesting. That also relates directly to your emotion and your emotion attention. Psychologists speak of emotion dysregulation in these patients. We could clearly show that this abnormal relationship between the self directly relates here to the deficits, to the changes in emotional dysregulation, that they see everything in a negative way, even neutral pictures. That's what we tested here. So, and I give you another example, which is very interesting, is meditation. So in meditation, I don't need to tell you, there's sort of, you feel more in tune, in line with your environment, and you're less focused on your own self and your inner thoughts. This has been described by Iwpl, which is a researcher in New York, originally from Serbia, as non-dual awareness. So usually we have a dual awareness. Split here, you can see between self. You make a clear distinction. This is myself, this is the other. And that goes along with the distinction of inner mental life, outer physical life. Inner world, outer world. However, in meditation, you don't feel that dichotomy, this duality anymore, but you become part of the environment and you feel synchronized and more in unity with your context. So meaning this self and other is really sort of no longer present. That's why they call dual awareness versus non-dual awareness. So now, and of course, obviously, there's also a different spatial organization. Your space is partitioned into both self, internal self, external world, or it's just one space. And that's, if you ask many meditators, that's exactly what they experience, particularly the most proficient one. And in India, there were many people telling me that. So, and now what happens with yourself? Remember these three different layers or networks of self: mental, exoceptive, outer body, inner body. And usually the regions in the mental self have the strongest activity and the strongest connection to the rest of the brain when compared to the bodily self regions. However, in meditation, and you can literally see and measure that in the brain, that changes drastically. Basically, it's the opposite. Now the inner body and the outer body region, here's the green stuff, have the strongest connection with the rest of the brain, and the mental self regions, the cognitions are sort of more in the background. So, and that makes sense. So how is this now in your experience manifest? That is very simple. It is manifest in that you feel more in tune, more part of the environment, and less dominated by your own inner thoughts. So the inner thoughts are more in the background and completely recede in very experienced meditators, very proficient. And your synchronization, literally your synchronization with the external environment, your unity takes over. And we indicated that by these figures. I think it's a very nice figure, which a student of mine drew that. It's a non-dual, it's a sort of a dual awareness here, and here you're part of the environment. That's here when you become part of the music itself or whatever. So here you experience duality and locality because you're cut off from the world. Here you experience non-duality and non-locality. So I think it's a beautiful example how the spatial organization of your brain / topography really shapes your mental features / here the meditation. So remember I taught you about initially the hypothesis the self is a very special feature in the brain, higher order, and everything else is non-special. Now here we say the brain is not tied to local activity in the single regions, but it's everywhere in the whole brain. Is the most basic feature. So it's nothing special. It's the most basic feature and important. It's intrinsic to the brain. Put more philosophically, this means that there's an intrinsic subjectivity in your brain. So now neuroscientists would kill me for that, particularly Western neuroscientists, because they're not, if you're not a scientist, you're doing subjectivity. And I will answer to them, you confuse methodological objectivity with ontological subjectivity. Because I can research subjectivity as it exists in an objective way. But they often don't make that distinction between methodological approach and ontological reality and existence. So, and that is, if I didn't learn much over the last 20, 30 years, but if I learned one thing, subjectivity is an intrinsic phenomenon. You cannot eradicate it and you cannot re-explain this, but you can objectively research this. You can quantify it, you can mark it, you just need to be some creative. Yeah, you need to have some creative ways.
Only takes one step at a time, one is sequential, and one idea at a time, or are we talking our consciousness is everything at a time? I'm a little confused. This one. I mean, the idea of the wave sees the way as if it's sequential. One idea.
No, there are many parallel ways. Many parallel ways.
So
it's not sequential.
Many different things
of course, there are many different timescales. There's a multitude of waves going on. If that multitude of waves / timescales is reduced, our relationship to the environment suffers. So it's not sequential. It's not sequential. So I hope I showed you that here, brain dynamics, and that's also your brain spontaneous activity. Your brain has an ongoing activity, is always active, independent of any external task, stimuli. So then the question is, why is this spontaneous activity so relevant for the self? So imagine, for instance, if you go out and your car is constantly moving. So you enter your car and your car is always moving. You'll be completely confused. You say, what is this? You might call me as a psychiatrist. But that's exactly what the brain does. It continuously moves. Compare that to a tennis player. I was still big fan of Roger Federer. Before you see the service, they move. They constantly move and walk a little bit back and forth. And why is that relevant? Because they want to bring themselves into an optimal position for whatever comes as a service from the other guy, let's say from Nadal or Djokovic. Yeah. So of course they don't know. They cannot predict where the other guy will hit the service. So they try to map as much space as possible to that they, in an optimal likelihood, optimal position for returning the service. Same with the brain. Our brain is continuously active because it's always open to receive some kind of services / input or from the external world. So, and that means in the same way the movements of the tennis player are strongly shaped by the service of the other guy, the brain's spontaneous activity is strongly shaped by its environmental context. And I show you a beautiful example for that. For me, one of the most fascinating features in our recent findings, and probably of neuroscience in general, how much your brain is shaped by the temporal structure of its environment. It's amazing. So here I show you, culture shapes spontaneous brain dynamics. So what did we do here? So here we investigated Chinese and Canadian people, different samples. And there is in psychology known that the sense of self is slightly differently defined. People sense their self in a different way in East and West. So for instance, in the Western world, as you know, it's very much independent, particularly in the Anglo-American world, particularly in the US and also in Canada. It's first, you define yourself as an independent entity, yourself, you're independent of others, you must be very special and as distinct from the other. However, when you go more towards the Eastern world, you see that people define themselves through the relationship with others. And I don't need to tell you, in the Far Eastern world, also Confucius hierarchy of relationships. So, and that has been described in psychology as independent self, Western self, versus interdependent self in the Chinese world, in the also Japanese world. Also. So, and what we did here now, we investigated the pure spontaneous activity / resting state activity in EEG of these different subjects in Canada and China, and we also had some Italian subjects in the middle. So, and I don't want to go here into all the details of this method, but what we found, look for instance, this is a typical what we call a power spectrum at these curves. So this is an EEG, electroencephalography. It measures the electrical activity in your brain. And you can see here, for instance, and this is a typical power spectrum. This is one what is called alpha wave, alpha power, you say alpha peak. And for instance, you see, so each line is one subject. And you can see that the Canadian subjects are very different from each other, very different in their EEG patterns. Whereas the Chinese people are really similar in their patterns. So each line, one subject, they're very similar. And then we applied, as I said, I don't want to go into detail here, various analysis methods to really show that this is really related to the degree to which different subjects differ from each other. If you have a more relational view, interdependent view, of course, you adapt yourself, meaning your brain does it for you. Yeah, and that's what we could show. So you become more similar. And you see this, I mean, it's very normal. You see this in partner who are together for 10, 20 years. you see very similar gestures and movements in them. Yeah, so because it's unconscious, because your brain adapts over time. Yeah, unless you hate your partner. Yeah, who knows? Yeah, and same here. So that really tells you how your cultural context shapes even the most basic of your brain activity. And then here you can see this again. Here for the alpha waves, you can really see this. This is a lot of statistic. And why is this important? Because this alpha wave, this alpha peak here, what I showed before, this one here, in the brain, it's very important for input processing, how external stimuli are processed in the brain. So if it's very similar among subjects, it means that they process the stimuli, the external input, in a more or less similar way. So that really makes it, and that establishes your relationship to the environment. Yeah. So and here then we could also show that that is also related to psychological features. So we also applied a psychological scale, self-consciousness scale here, and we again observe that the subjects in China are more similar in their ratings of the scale than the Canadian subject. And interestingly, the Italians were in between. So you can read that in the paper. There's a long, very long supplementary material online. So what does this tell us? And this is very important. So that our brain continuously compares its own inner time with the outer time of the environment. Is a matching. It's like, okay, this music is too fast for me. I don't like it. Why? Because your inner brain time is probably slower. That's why you don't like it. Literally, we just tested this. That's the case. So your brain basically prefers that music which is similar to itself, where it can compare and match the best relationship. Because, very simple put, your brain wants to synchronize. It's incredible. Your brain really wants to synchronize with this environment, with its own body, and then you feel good. And I show you a study on that. And why your question, I think, there you are. Sorry, I didn't see you here. Different time scales. Why different ways, why different time scales are important? Just look at this picture. So deconstruct the picture. There are waves, there are icebergs in the background. Yeah, then there's a forest, then there's a canoe guy. Yeah, so if you want to apprehend all that, you need a large array of different time scales. Yeah, like in classical Western music, you have complex time scales, like when you listen to Mahler, Beethoven, and so forth. You have a multitude of time scales. Bach, yeah, it's incredible. And your brain synchronizes with that. Why? Because it had similar time scales. So that's why it's constantly ongoing and changing. It's like a cooking pot. Boiling, you put in the food and then it's cooking. Yeah, and at the end you get some kind of structure, meaning you have a mental feature. Yeah, and that constantly fluctuates. Yeah, so please don't quote me on that I compare the brain with a cooking pot. Yeah. So you see here, and that's where it's really important. Yeah, it follows the environment. That's the way we are always, our brain always is part of the world. And how is that psychologically manifest? Here we did a fascinating study with 1,000 subjects, and we had different psychological scales for the experience of synchrony. So how much are you in synchrony with yourself, with your body, with others? We also included established psychological scales, identification with humanity, connectedness to nature, and all kinds of really interesting and non-orthodox scales. You see me smiling. And what we observed, this was a really fascinating study, that here's a synchrony of self. This is a network study of all the results. The synchrony of self with its own self over time, with the body, with the environment, with others, is really a core feature of your mental life. And it impacts your thoughts and past, thoughts and future, thought and present, sense of freedom, and so on and so forth. And what we also, I don't show that here, what we also thought, when that synchrony decreases, you have a much higher likelihood of depression and anxiety. Yeah, so we showed that here. Those subjects who had a decreased perception of synchrony also had higher ratings of anxiety, subclinical anxiety and depression. This was a sample of 1,000 subjects, so it's validated. So that's really, I think, now, of course, what we want to have synchrony measures in the brain and links this to this subjective experience of synchrony. So why is this matching of time scales important? So just imagine, coming back to your argument here, so imagine a robot. So here you have a different, look at this, so music has different time scales, very fast ones, very slow ones. Now, if you have a robot which has only the fast time scales, but not the slower ones, it will dance too fast. That's what happens in patients with mania. They're too fast. We are too slow for them. Now, if the robot has only the slower time scales, the longer ones, but not the faster ones, it will dance too slow. That's what happens in depression. And then if you have a multitude of different waves and time scales, then you have a higher likelihood of adapting to the whole thing. So
I'm just wondering, because you mentioned, because the faster one, there is a manic kind of, yeah. And then the slow one, depression.
Yeah.
But there's a term, manic depression. How do you explain that?
Yeah, because you're usually not both at the same time. That fluctuates. Yeah, that fluctuates long term, 6 months, 1 year, and so forth. Yeah, that's again waves. Yeah, so bipolar disorder is for me the perfect example for that because they're unstable. Many patients report to me that already as an early adolescence, they always flip. They never knew who they are. Am I the fast one or am I the slow one? It's a real problem for the sense of self. Yeah, and that you see also, we have put also some neuroscience on it. Yeah, so this is very interesting for artificial intelligence because the current devices do not have time scales, very limited time scale. That's why they're not adapted. They cannot participate in the ongoing physical time as the brain can do. That's a key difference. If you want to use these times, I would like to have developed some of these devices for proper use in mental health therapy. So self, and this is important, self is for me basically a placeholder for what I mean subjectivity. The subjectivity or self is intrinsic to the brain and its relationship with the environment. Yeah, so this is really, and it has a key role in shaping how we process and relate to the external world. So now what does this imply philosophically? So that has, of course, serious implications. Any science, any good science has philosophical implications and philosophical presuppositions, and vice versa, is impacted by the philosophical presuppositions. So what does this mean? And the key feature here is, of course, is the brain's attunement, or as we say, temporal spatial alignment, as I say, to the environment. That changes the whole notion of what is called in the Western world the mind-body problem. Because then, if I can show how the brain's alignment to body and the world, that is directly related to mental features, that means I need to include the world in my conception of the mind, necessarily so. So now I'm abandoning the empirical level for the expert. Now I'm going to the ontological level. So now I'm talking about existence and reality in the natural world. So, and this is why I wrote this book in 2018. This is a big book. If you have time, you want to read it. If you don't have time, don't. Look one of my YouTube talks. So here I say, based in part on these empirical findings, that the mind-brain problem is probably the wrong framework in which to consider the question for neuronal and mental feature, that we need to replace it by a more plausible problem, as I say, the world-brain problem. So let me briefly explicate that. So again, now you see the iceberg is a continuous metaphor here in my talk. And now I basically use it in a philosophical, ontological context, where I say the mind-body problem is just the surface. what is the deeper?
Mind and body, mind and brain is two different things, not the same.
Yeah, I knew that question would come because I always, for me, the body is just another input like the world the brain has to deal with.
Mind and brain. Mind is the same as the brain.
No, I never said that. So I'm talking, as you might have heard, I talk about mental features. Because that's what you experience, and whether you really want to have the assumption of a mind which is possibly separate from body and brain, that's the second question. That's already a philosophical presupposition.
And the mind is not physical.
You will not get any statement from this from me. You will not. Why? So now I have to go into the whole thing. So you see what so if you ask me that question, is the mind physical, yes or no? Is the mind reducible to brain or body? I am with the traditional Western framework, so I try to solve a problem within the existing question / how are mind and brain related to each other. But that's the question, so I'm not providing an answer to that question. Now I need some water. So what I do not provide an answer to that question. I question the question itself. That's what you call a transcendental-like approach. Of course, I learned it from my countryman, Immanuel Kant. It was brilliant. So I go back. I go back into the presupposition of the current question, and that said, is the existence and reality of a mind as distinct from the body conceivable in the natural world? Because only with that question I can raise the question for the relationship between mind and body. If I do not, I have to, yes, it is conceivable that there is a mind distinct from the body. But if I don't do that, I question the question itself, because I say, is there any possible evidence for such conceivability? That's where, of course, I kick in as an epistemologist, ontologist, and also as an empirical guy, neuroscientist. And then the whole book is basically saying that there's an alternative way, an alternative, maybe the relationship between world and brain. And I showed you my empirical, let's say, empirical deduction, if you want to keep here in Kantian terms. Yeah, analog to Kant's transcendental deduction. Yeah, so I say basically, okay, maybe there's an alternative, world and brain, because as I showed you, how your brain integrates, attunes to the world, provides a necessary connection to mental features. And I will come back to that. Okay, and then at the end of the book, I say, yeah, the world-brain problem is more plausible in the natural world than the mind-body problem. Okay, so let me see. I took out that slide, sorry. Okay, sorry, it's okay, doesn't matter. So, since I already said, so one key aspect to understand my position here is this thing. In the Western world, of course, it goes back to Descartes, the mind, the mental features have always been considered as special. Yeah, like Descartes said, okay, mental features, consciousness, I cannot observe consciousness like I can observe the body. So meaning from that he inferred, okay, the body must have a different ontological substance than the mind, / the ontological dualism on mind and body. And now you said, no, we don't do dualism anymore. Now we know the mind is in the brain. That's basically your reductionism you wanted to tickle out of me, and I resisted. So I say, no, we still have a dualism, because now what you see in current neuroscience is still that special neuronal substrates are assumed for consciousness. Some of you might know the debate, integrated information theory, global neuronal workspace, and different theories of consciousness. They all assume a special neuronal substrate, in addition to the other non-special neuronal substrate. So that makes a difference. So, however, this is a beautiful quote by one of the Western philosophers who's a little bit more sophisticated in the whole thing, Thomas Nagel, said, you really need to include both. That's the right viewpoint. conceptually subjectivity in spatial temporal structure. So you can imagine, I was delighted to see this quote because that fits, that intrinsically links, provides, philosophically speaking, a necessary condition, a necessary connection between subjectivity and spatial temporal structure. And you saw my earlier empirical result, that exactly conforms to that. So I am not interested in what makes mental features special. I'm much more interested in what makes mental features completely non-special. You saw all my examples from basic dynamic features, music, waves, sea waves, and so on and so forth, by which I described the brain. And beginning of next year, a big textbook of mine will come out on brain dynamics and mind dynamics, spatial temporal neuroscience. And I myself was surprised. I use all kind of examples from nature, from trees, non-living nature most often, to describe the analogies to the brain. So meaning nothing new, nothing non-special, just look at the non-special, then you see that what you think is special is very non-special. So that's, for me, you just put a smile on my face, as you can see. Yeah, and that's my space and time, and the space and time and basic waves are the most basic features. Yeah. So, and when you look into the history of science, it was often like that. Yeah, something which was considered trivial or neglected because, oh, it was so special, turned out to be completely non-special. Yeah, another typical in the 20th century was the idea for life energy. In the first part of the 20th century, they looked for what Henri Bergson, philosopher from France, described as an élan vital, a life energy, and tried to find a substrate for that. And it turned out, yeah, it's the genes. Then we don't even need that question. So here you already know that quote. I already mentioned all that. So again, the waves, I mentioned that. Here, basically here, I think it's a summary from the empirical to the ontological. The dynamics of spatial temporal patterns provide indicators of the connection of brain and mind or mental features. These temporal patterns can be measured by the brain's waves, and that's important. So now, what I would say, look, your world-brain relation is at the very bottom, it's a deeper layer of the iceberg. Then you abstract from that, you basically forgot the floor on which you stand on, and then you say, okay, there's a mind-body problem. However, then you deal with the mind-body problem, but basically you just deal with your upper body and you forgot your legs. And then you're wondering, how did I get here? Yeah. So yeah, of course, and then how is that possible? And then you come up with all kinds of strange ideas. But it's very simple. Just look at your body. There's some legs. They got you there. Same thing here. Yeah. So here's this poor guy here is always likes this one, the mind-body problem is very practical. So what I'm talking about is existence and reality in the natural world. And we need to go beyond the brain to the world. And that's nothing special. Just look at the Copernican revolution. We were stuck. Okay, we thought that the Earth is the center of the universe. And then he looked beyond Earth and thought, okay, the Earth is not the center of the universe, it's the sun. So he looked beyond the Earth into the universe. Same here. I look beyond the brain, not only to the body, but to the world. Good. So then, this is really here, a lot of cultural differences, East-West, come in. So let me make it simple. The typical presupposition, particularly in the mind-body discussion, okay, there are two different properties, mental properties and physical properties. And once you have that assumption, of course, you say, are the mental properties the physical properties? Are they different? Are they the same? And then you come up with all the different mind-body theories discussed in the Western. However, nowadays, there's really a deadlock on this theory because, of course, you forgot half of the story. Yeah, you forgot your legs. And that's also typical. It's a property or element-based ontology. Elements are primary and there's no relation. So now when an element-based ontologist said, yeah, world-brain relation, what is this? There must be first a world and then a brain and then there can be a relation. However, I would argue, no. Out of that relation comes out what you call brain. So the relation is at least primary there and constitute. Look into mother, parents, and their child. The child comes from the relation between the parents. Same here. Yeah. And that really links to different form of ontology, relation-based ontology. So in the Western philosophy, it has some sort of sidelines. Alfred North Whitehead would be somehow compatible with the relation, but it's a process-based ontology. Henri Bergson is unclear to me. There are not really many people in the Western world doing this. There's now what is called ontic structuralism. Structuralism, that's, you'll see that in my book. But there's not much. But through Kaya, I learned a lot that is very well compatible with ancient Chinese philosophy, and it resonates with much more. So this is really a key feature, and I think here I show you this slide. So here you have first the element, and then you have the relation. Here, it's the other way around. First there's the relation, and then the properties are an abstraction from that relation, a condensation. And of course, Norghoff will tell you it's a temple abstraction. So you abstract from the underlying dynamics a concept which is static, which is basically atemporal, like the brain, like the mind. Yeah. And because you abstract and then you forgot from what you abstracted, of course, the problem is not solvable. Yeah. So same here. So different properties of substances, mind-body problem, and here as a result of basic underlying processes, relation and structure. And structure, of course, is clear, is spatial temple for Norghoff. So then you say, yeah, Norghoff, now which ontology holds empirically plausible? Of course, the answer is clear. It's relation-based ontology. And I really like this quote again, Thomas Nagel, 12 in a book for which he was heavily criticized in the Western world. And the way they read it, it was a cosmos thing. Oh, he's a creationist and he becomes a mentalist, and he just criticized the materialism you were alluding to. But they misread that as basically spiritualism. Yeah, so it's unbelievable. Our belief system in the brain is just incredible. I smile about that. The older I become, so it's really funny. So this is for me here, and I think this is really it. I mean, the aim would be to offer a plausible picture how we fit into the world, and I would say how we can become part of the world as whole, because that's what is the mental state about. When you experience a mental state consciousness, you experience yourself as part of the wider world against a background and a context. Yeah, so your point of view, Thomas Nagel pointed out, I have a whole paper on that last year or the year before, I can't remember, is intrinsically ecological. It's based as a virtual point of view. It places me here, background, foreground. This is now my point of view, but my point of view is only as part of this context. Yeah, and my brain creates that virtual point of view. And that's your world-brain relationship. And here, and that's really important. Now, if you take a truly ontological view, so now I no longer take the perspective of the world, but I abstract and I take the perspective of the world. From the world point of view, the brain timescales are just one little subset of much longer and larger timescales. Consider seismic earth waves. Seismic earth waves are extremely slow and long. It can take years, decades, little waves which we cannot measure because they're so slow, and then suddenly an earthquake erupts. My assumption is that our earthquake prediction is so bad, literally bad, because we do not overlap so much with our brain timescales with the earthquake timescales. We cannot apprehend them. Yeah, meaning it's also difficult for us to measure proper, to develop proper measurement devices. But that's a guess you might consider. But what it tells you that our brain and time space, ontologically speaking, are nested. Remember my example with the Russian dolls and the Chinese crystal ball within the world's time and space. So from the world, we're just one little time scale, negligible, and the world will probably get rid of us soon, yeah, evolutionary speaking. Yeah, so if you continue all what we are doing, yeah, so but that tells you that's an ontological perspective, and that relationship is key for mental features. Yeah, so here, and I'm close to the end of my talk, so this picture is very important for me. And in the Western world, this is very often misunderstood. So I explicitly speak about world-brain relationship. Why? Because it is the brain is part of the world. So ontologically, you're dealing with the world. So you need to have the world as primary, because otherwise you introduce anthropocentrism. If you speak of a brain-world relationship, you speak of anthropocentrism. That's pre-Copernican. That's like considering the Earth as the center of the universe. That's the same for me. So when you see in this 2018 book, the last part is all about Copernican revolution in neuroscience and philosophy. And that's also important. You see here, this is ontological. This is about consciousness, and you can't see it here. Here comes the world-brain problem. Then here is epistemological / empiric cognition, and here it resides in the mind-body problem. And of course, all kinds of fallacies, as I indicated. So this is really a key, philosophically speaking, a key slide. So how can this poor person coming to the end of my talk resolve our conflict in the mind-body problem? It's her relation to the world. If the world is not appealing to this guy, then the no will succeed. If the world offers some, Gibson says, the psychologist Gibson speaks of affordances, something interesting which matches with the time scales in the brain, then the get up will outperform the no. So it really tells you, just this little example, we need to go beyond the brain to the world-brain and body relationship to the world-brain problem. So, and I think, what did I do now? I did something wrong, sorry. Sorry, I'm almost close there. Here. You have seen this, you have seen this. Almost there. Okay, sorry, there's no slide. Okay, with that, I come to the end of my talk, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for this very, this is not only informative lecture, but I think this is one of the super lectures I have heard for the last 25 years. So I'm talking about myself, okay? So this very synthetic, integrated approach to the topic, I think, has created a lot of space for more dynamic discussions and views and perceptions on this question of brain, mind, and I think Prof. Norghoff added the idea of the world. And that's actually gives a different landscape of thinking and a more open type of an understanding how this human lives in this world and how this dynamics happens. This is really a wonderful lecture. A lot of points are there, a lot of new questions also for you scholars and researchers and students to take up. So let's go straight to, I see some questions in the Zoom and also some people in the YouTube channel, but let's start here. If there are some questions here, please, I think because of the time, so you have to be quick and straight to the point so that we benefit more from our professor, Norghoff. Go ahead, brother. Let's start here. Go ahead.
Dankeschön, Professor. My name is John. Meine Frage is the psychological occurrence of flow or being in the zone where the metaphor time disappears, is that a mental feature of the inner time of the brain, which you mentioned, and also a feature of the non-dual self?
I like your little German in there.
Trying to get better at it.
Yeah, good question. I discussed that a lot with meditation people, because that could be an argument against the temple nature. So if you're in the zone flow, let's just say a complete standstill of time, that you experience the absence of time. And so I spoke to some very experienced meditation people in India. And actually it was a Buddhist monk who escaped from Tibet and then went to Mysore in India, which is the heart of, there's a big Tibetan culture there, monastery there. And he said, no, even then you experience some fluctuations. So after that, so you see how experience is relevant for me. And after that, I went back to Google. Google always helps. And I said, they're so-called slow waves. Slow waves is in physics, it's a very phenomenon. So now you can imagine, I would love to have some of those very proficient meditators. You need very proficient meditator with a very good introspection, because this is not an easy one, because this is right on the verge of experience, non-experience. Yeah, because if the waves are really slow, you need a very fine-grained sensorium, phenomenological sensorium here, to capture and apprehend these waves, which usually would escape, because your time scales are not fine-grained enough. And so my assumption is that these are slow waves. Yeah, it's a phenomenon. Look under Google, slow waves is a physics phenomenon, and the brain has physics feature, nothing else. Yeah, and that relates to that. Yeah. So in that, of course, you can imagine that's for me a key point. If you can really show that there's no time, I think it's just what to tell you as experience no time is just relative to what you experience in the non-meditative as the time flow. If you're becoming much slower in meditation, then you experience that relative to your non-meditative baseline as the absence of time.
So it's actually not the absence of time, but it's more like your brain waves are really slow. That's
exactly.
That's the mental process that's going on.
Is, as I would say, it's a dynamic reorganization. Yeah, both of your brain and your experience. Yeah, if that dynamic reorganization holds long enough, if you're real proficient meditators, and you see that in the proficient meditators, that they have a meditative attitude even in the non-meditative state. Their self is the meditative state. That's what I would call topographic dynamic reorganization.
Great. Prof. Jasir?
Hello. Thank you very much for a very informative lecture. My name is Jasir Ouda. I am a visiting professor here, specialized in Islamic thought and Quranic studies. And I really appreciate the courage of going against the mainstream theories in Western scholarship when it comes to a number of issues. And I think this is one of the good features of Western scholarship, that it corrects itself and it learns from itself, but it takes brave people to really push the paradigm. In way of interaction with the Islamic paradigm, which most of us here are busy with, perhaps let me give you a few comments on how some of these issues are viewed from an Islamic perspective. From the Islamic perspective, there is no definition of brain or mind in the original Islamic paradigm, but it is the heart that is in the center of knowledge, understanding, remembrance, linking, proving. It's just the heart. And in the Quranic paradigm, the heart is in the chest, it says. So basically it's here. The muscle could be one level of it, but it has a number of levels. And that's the heart that comprehends or understands or does what we call in Arabic aql. That could be translated as mind or brain, but the brain really would be an organ of the body rather than a place of consciousness. That's in the Islamic paradigm. And therefore, the brain could interact with the heart, or the brain might misinteract with the heart, but it's the heart that is in charge. And this, in the Islamic paradigm, is not just for the humans. The humans are not special, and it's everything that is living, not just everything that is plant or animal-based, according to the Western classification, but actually everything is living and everything is conscious, including matter, let alone plants and so on. So everything has a self, in that sense, and everything would be living and remembering in that sense. And we recently are saying that this could solve some of the issues, some of the spooky phenomena that they couldn't understand in quantum physics or genetic sciences. Or so this is just an idea of what's happening in the Islamic thought recently in terms of some of these questions. In terms of the objectivity and subjectivity, we don't view it as the correct duality. We question the question, actually, of objectivity versus subjectivity, because there is no subjective reality that is pure without an objective way of measuring it, and there is no objective reality that is really without a lot of subjectivity. And the reference would be the divine concepts. So basically, the divine concepts of the scripture would define truth in the reality, and based on the truth, we go beyond that to see how much truth does the reality have. So finally, for example, defining oneself is actually in relation to God in the Islamic paradigm, and therefore the connections with the reality is based on the connection with God. So that is a different culture that perhaps in future research, if you would include it, I think you would find some very interesting differences. Thank you very much and welcome again.
Yeah, there's a lot to say. I will try to keep myself short. And I wanted to make a point. So the first point, the heart, I'm aware of that. No, I shut myself off. Thank you. Brain is easier than the technology for me. The brain, see, there's a lot of research on brain-heart, brain-lung, brain-body interaction. And that's sure you cannot consider them separately. However, for what the brain is really needed is a spatial temporalizing. It puts heart and the organ into a wider space. So I wrote 2 big volumes in 2014, Unlocking the Brain. And at the end the brain is a spatial temporalizing organ. The stomach digests, the lung breathes, cleans the ducts, the kidney cleans the blood, stomach digests, blah, 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 blah. The brain temporalizes. That's the function of the brain. And by that, it creates sort of this virtual mental space. So that provides a space for the heart. That provides a virtual space. So the second point, very interesting, and of course I completely agree, probably for different reasons though, the sharing between the different species and also the non-organic nature. So when I wrote this book, this comes out From Brain Dynamics to the Mind, Spatial Temporal Neuroscience. Next year, it's a big textbook, includes all kinds of stuff. As I said, I constantly refer to the non-living nature. So it was a revelation. But I would say, and that of course is clear, expected from me now, I would say in order to make sense of that, you need to look for the shared dynamics. Yeah, so that's for me the interface between empirical and ontology. I think that's where I think really, of course, it's clear that I would say this is my own bias, the space-time stuff comes in, topography and dynamics. Yeah, I wouldn't, at this point in time, I wouldn't know of any alternative. Yeah, but maybe if another predecessor standing on my shoulders said, not if you were too short-sighted, okay, it was this. Fine. Yeah, I just considered the upper legs and not the lower legs. It's normal. Yeah, like I stand on the shoulders of Kant. Yeah, so I could see more. It's normal. So hopefully somebody picks it up, some clever guy. The third point was the subjectivity, objectivity. Of course, that's an absolute key point, and as you see, for me, this is everything. And again, so here I come in as a neurophilosopher. And neurophilosophy is for me a methodological strategy. So it's not what you think it is. It's not what Patricia Churchill did, or it's just everything reducing to the brain. I'm really angry about that because it's destroyed that. So what I mean by neurophilosophy is that you use insights from the brain for philosophical questions. And you will see my most recent papers on Heidegger, on Whitehead, I really try to make brain science fruitful for ontological epistemological questions. And with that, I'm not doing anything special. Go back into the 19th century, Arthur Schopenhauer, go back even to Kant, go back to Leibniz, go back to Spinoza. I'm not doing anything special. It looks only special compared to the 20th century philosophy, where they had this complete divide. So, and that is really, and I think for me, this is the end of, not an end, but I'm really very sad about the state of Western philosophy, meaning I don't do anything anymore, because the kind of reviews one gets is just beyond. They don't know what they do and why they do it. So that's very sad. And that also applies to subjectivity and objectivity. So you can use these concepts as methodological concepts. So you can have a subjective method and an objective method. Science is about an objective method, intersubjectively accessible, methodologically speaking. Then you can see, and that is hardly pointed out. Then you have an epistemological concept of subjectivity, objectivity. That's basically what I understood. And that somehow confluences with the methodological, but it's not the same. That's what I understand Kant tried to get a grip on. Then there is an ontological concept of subjectivity and objectivity. That's often dealt with in metaphysics in the Western world, which again is another thing. So, and what I'm trying to do, for me, more and more clear, there is an ontological subjectivity in the world. And that probably we are, compared to the rest of the whole world, all these different species are ontologically subjective to an if you take the natural world as objective. Yeah, it's a relative to that. So here you already see how the meaning of these concepts slides according to the concept. So in what a lot of Western philosophy does, when they say, I had so many criticisms on that, when they say, okay, you confuse the empirical and the ontological when you bring in your brain into the ontological category error. It took me 10 years to understand, and now I say, no, what you're doing, you do a methodological ontological fallacy, because you infer from a methodological approach to the ontological domain when you charge me with a category error. And that's exactly, look into Kant, you see Kant criticize the fallacy in Locke. An empirical ontological fallacy is a footnote in Critique of Pure Reason. It's a Descartes of an epistemological ontological fallacy, and he's right, because he inferred from an epistemological fact / consciousness to an ontological substance / dualism. Yeah, and you see these kind of fallacies in current Western philosophies abundant. Everywhere they are. Whitehead had wonderful fallacies. You see some of these fallacies discussed in the third part of my book. So that's so far, you see, the first thing I would analyze the concepts according to the context in which they are taken. And that context is often neglected. People are not aware of that context. It's incredible, but that's philosophy for me. When you look into the old philosophers, that's what philosophy is about, going back to the presupposition. The last point is clear, that's where we diverge, the fourth point. But it depends on the meaning. That's where as you see, you didn't hear anything from me about the typical Western philosophy logical approach. The logical world. When you look my earlier writings, I really try to link logical world and natural worlds. And I have tens of pages at home on my laptop. I gave up on that because I always failed. And that's why I'm just ontology. This is just beyond me. And so I remain indifferent. Yeah, so I cannot say yes or no. And that's fair. Yeah. Yeah, I think I said it.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Yeah, that's really great. Let me check on the Zoom there. I see Professor Osman Bakar, our great philosopher, waving his hand over there. Come, Prof, go ahead. Come.
Thank you, Professor Aziz. And thank you, Professor Norghoff. I'm sorry I'm not able to greet you physically at ISTAC, but I enjoy your presentation. I think it is a very significant one, and your presentation convinced me that we need to have a dialogue on intercultural dialogue on a philosophy of neuroscience. There are many ideas that you present. I have no problem. I mean, and certainly I share, but some others, I think I need to have some more discussion. But given the shortage of time here, I just want to look at the larger pictures. In other words, and I will not go into the micro issues that you brought up, but more on the, I said, the bigger issues. Now, I see that your new thesis, you want to basically you want to run away from the body mind problem and opt for the world mind problem. Now, I'm not convinced of the justification for that. I think what you are doing, and please accept this as a sincere critique. Basically, the whole body mind problem may be described as a microcosmic issue, as psychological issue, psychology to be understood in the broad sense. But basically, it is that you are dealing with reality within a part of the human person. That is the body and the mind. An issue which has bogged down Western thought for quite some time. But basically the world mind problem is only a broader version of that problem, and by just extending the scope of that problem, it does not erase, does not delete the nature of the problems encountered in the body and mind issue. Now, talking from the perspective of Islamic philosophy, the body mind problem has been discussed by a good number of Muslim philosophers, classical Muslim philosophers, and including from what you try to emphasize, the so-called methodological issues from that issue. So it is where perhaps convergence, you can find convergence between the Islamic the culture and the modern Western philosophical thought. But so while I say from Islamic perspective, what you call the world, I know you don't define the world, but I understand from your what you reference to the world, it means the cosmos. The cosmos meaning the macrocosm, the cosmic reality outside the human consciousness. And you still are talking about the mind, okay? And that's good. You're still talking about the mind, and the mind is basically part of the microcosmic reality. But in Islamic philosophy, there's a one-to-one correspondence between the microcosm and the macrocosm. In other words, the cosmos, the external cosmos, the macrocosm, is structured in the same way as the human mind. That's why some people say the cosmos has a mind of its own. The mind of the cosmos and the mind of the human person, they are identically structured, and that is important. Therefore, I said there's no need to move to go beyond. But by going beyond, maybe it's good in one sense that you can understand the all issues discussed in body mind problem in the West now can be understood in a better perspective, from a better perspective. I will argue that. So I think that's very, very important. This is, in fact, it is inspired by the Quran. The Quran calls the signs, the symbols within the human person, in the same term, ayat meaning the signs of God, as the same as the what is the signs being displayed in the macrocosmic reality. I think that's the first point I would like to say. Second, the question of the relationship between body and mind. Now,
Answering the first question will need 1 hour.
It's okay, Prof. Maybe I just want to bring it up because it is important.
Okay.
Maybe Prof. Norghoff doesn't have to respond to all, but That's my first point. In other words, I'm commenting on his new proposal now. He wants to go to the world mind problem. To me, I don't see anything significant except the scope. You extend the scope, but basically the same problems are going to be encountered. And the same methodological problem, the same epistemological problem. That is the I'm saying. But the other one is the question of because you mentioned many things that caught my attention, and certainly we have no problem. It's kind of convergence, kind of question. What is shared, the common ground between body and mind. It's interesting. And the second point is a question of the multi-layered self. I wish you to know about that, but that is very important. The concept of multi-layered self, something like what Carl Jung and before did in Germany. You know, the question of the self meaning according to the heart. The language the is the heart. We're referring to the self with capital S because we're not referring to the lowest ego or the lowest self, but that self which is identical to the heart, to the intellect with the capital I, all these. Now the idea here, the question of who is organizing whom. So from the Islamic philosophy perspective, mind and the brain are not the same. And there is a growing new school of thought in the United States right now, talking about this issue. No, you should not confuse between brain and mind. Brain is not the same as mind. Mind is transcendent. Is transcendent to the brain, meaning that the mind is the organizing principle of the brain's functions. The brain's all the what we call the neurological phenomena, events, they are not the guiding principle. So I think that is what under
Okay, Prof. Okay, Prof. I think he got your questions. Okay, come.
Maybe I comment very briefly on some of the issues. So you're right. My concept of world is underdetermined ontologically. Absolutely right. Of course, you can imagine I would determine the world also again in space and time scales. That's why I speak of spatial temporal ontology in the 2018 book there. So absolutely right in that. What is new? The reversal in the perspective. So of course, my approach happens in a context and must be understood relative to that context. And that context is the current Western context of brain and mind in the last 50 to 100 years. That's the context within which I grew up and against which, or against that background, I'm reacting. So that's very important. So I would say it's really a reversal. And of course, I would really say this is a first attempt of a post-Copernican view because I think from the world to the brain. And trust me, it has direct impact on my research and how I deal with patients. So that's what I really say. And this is something I still want to do, just a separate book on this Copernican revolution. There's actually one paper of mine out in Chinese. It was translated into Chinese, where I compare Kant, Whitehead, Heidegger, and Zhangzhe with respect to their Copernican revolution. So that's a key issue for me. You're absolutely right. Of course, I'm in a context, I stand on the shoulders. So you mentioned Carl Gustav Jung. Yes, of course, no wonder Jung was strongly impacted by the Eastern world of thinking. And I'm also very active in the field of psychoanalysis, neuropsychodynamic. I stand on the shoulders of Husserl, who I started as a phenomenologist, in particular Heidegger with some strong ambivalences. And Heidegger spoke of a fundamental ontology, and I argue based on my stuff that his ontology was not fundamental enough, meaning it's still very anthropocentric, and that's true, being in time. But it's a time he speaks, it's not really the time of the world independent of the human being. So that's where he's still anthropocentric. It's very interesting to filter that out. And that means he's still pre-Copernican. So this is very fine-grained, but very important stuff there. Brain and mind, you said it very nicely. The mind is the organizing principle. Of course, you can imagine I agree with the second, the organizing principle, but not with the first one, the mind. What is the organizing principle? Your relationship to the world, the evolution, the history, that shapes. We need, that's what it is. Yeah. And that can occur on a shorter and longer time scales. That's the amazing thing. When I say that your brain participates in the ongoing physical time of the world, by that, the brain is organized. And if the brain loses that capacity to organize, that person of that brain will come to me as a psychiatrist. Yeah, so that is really it's amazing how the brain does it. It in a very active Kantian-like way, let itself organize and structure by the ongoing temporal structure in the environment. And of course, that is often chaotic, but it tries to find some regularities. It's amazing what nature invented there. It's just stunned. I become more and more aware that it just gives me goosebumps. Yeah, it's amazing, and it trickles down to very concrete empirical stuff what we're doing now, and also psychiatric disorders.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. I think because of the time, we're supposed to stop at 4:30. Now it's already 4:45. So to give more, opportunities for our brothers, please, 1 minute, straight to the point. We want to have more wisdom from this great scholar here. I think that's the point. Prof.
You never mentioned telos. You never mentioned telos. I'm a classical philosopher, so I want the idea of the mind interacting only with the external world and organizing it instead of the opposite. It actually seeks a goal. It actually gives a goal. The idea of telos being the what to seek for. So it's not just this. It's not just a mechanical interaction.
Yeah. So the last one I agree, it's not a mechanical, it's a dynamic interaction. And I know you probably would subsume dynamics under mechanics. You have a wider meaning, but that's okay. So it's not the classical mechanic, it's really a dynamics. And that's a science which has really been developed in the 20th century in physics, particularly in the second half. So absolutely. Is there a telos? I'm not sure whether I can answer that question. Of course, I know, what comes to my mind when you hear telos, which is different from what you mean by telos, is the 4 different causes by Aristotle, which I know falls very short. What you mean by telos? I don't really know. And okay, let me start just methodological. So you can conceive the concept of telos in a phenomenological experiential sense. You have an experience that says a telos. You can set the concept of telos in an epistemological sense. It's possible knowledge. And you can set the concept of telos in an ontological context. And that's probably where you are after. And you can set the concept of telos probably in a metaphysical context. That's all I can say. And I think I could probably say something to the methodological and phenomenological, maybe epistemological concept of telos, but I'm not sure whether I could say something ontological. I wouldn't have any access to that. Yeah, so it's no access door for me, intuitively now. But that's the way I would start when you give me basically, you're my professor, I'm your student, you give me homework, write 20 pages, only 20 pages about telos. That's the way I would start as a neurophilosopher. Yeah, and then I would also look at an empirical way of contemplating. So I would.
Man acts with the why, the goal first, and then how. Not the how first, and then the goal. So I would assume that would be the more important question.
See, for me, and you're hitting upon a very weak point in my case, I'm much more interested in the world-brain relation than in the brain-world relation. Because I want to go back to the basics, and that's a real weak point. But you see a little bit how I would probably approach it. Yeah, but I absolutely agree. And probably I'm more interested in this world brain than the brain world. Interestingly, just as a side note, it's very interesting when I speak in the Western world, intuitively, every 100% so far, I always speak of world brain, and they reply to me in brain world. I mean, it's the unconscious, your pre-Copernican unconscious, the anthropocentrism. I remember I gave a talk in Japan years ago, 200 people, and there was one Western guy asked a question, spoke of brain world. Yeah, and incredible. It's unconscious. I said, did you do this consciously? No. It's unbelievable. So I think that it's telling.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Prof. Okay, so let's, our brother, you were speaking before, but I think if you have a direct question, just we give a direct question.
Thank you, Prof. Okay, to rephrase the question, perhaps, when we talk about violence, violence in itself as an extension of memory and of an experience, would we say that the relationship between the world and the brain, if it's not abated or if it's not pacified, it can manifest in how we relate to other people as well? Because you talked about, for example, meditation as being one with the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I did a lot of forensic assessment and forensic people, meaning people who committed crime because of some psychiatric disorder. And you see horrible social conditions in which they grew up. Horrible. Yeah. And we have studies where we investigate the trauma, of course, on brain dynamics. And literally, so I deconstruct trauma, again, you can imagine, in the temple terms. We have papers on that, and I'm working with a colleague and former student of mine, he's now prof in Italy, on a spatial temple view of trauma and also spatial temple psychotherapy. Yeah, basically remedying that. And we also develop a time-space experience scale for trauma. Basically, what you have in trauma is really, you have basically a hole in your temporal continuity from past to future, which we always presuppose, which is a given for us. They have a hole in there. So imagine you walk here to the door and there's a big hole. How afraid and how you feel. That's exactly what they experience.
Yeah. Okay.
That's an interesting presupposition you have. Philosophers talk long. Which is true.
Okay. Sorry, Bob. Thank you so much. I'm just a student. So you were talking about the bottom of the iceberg. So I read Language, Truth and Logic of AJIR. So obviously he tried to like discredit metaphysics, then existence of God, then existence of soul. And he quoted of Hume that nothing but bundle of collection of different perceptions when it comes to the self. So I mean, when it comes to Islam, Muhammad or Jesus, they talk about maybe the soul. But when we see like Muslim philosophers or Western philosophers, like for Descartes, I think therefore I am. That means for Ibn Sina also, the floating man, he tried to talk about this kind of thing. So why do we associate like physical, consciousness with the metaphysical soul? Because this one, at the end of the day, if I say a floating man, or I think therefore I am, that means you mentioned about the mental states and physical states. Both are actually in the both are same. So why do we still associate like metaphysical self? That's all. Thank you so much.
If I understood your question, it's a very good question. Look into David Hume. David Hume, in a treatise of human nature, he has a bundle theory of self, and then he has a long section on how and why we come up with the idea that the self could be a mental entity. So, and I was asking that question I was asking myself in my earlier days, why on earth are we not able, what are the necessary, it's a very Kantian approach, what are the necessary conditions for the possible distinction of neuronal and mental states? And of course, that borders, the answer you need to give is an empirical and an epistemological answer. It's right at the border. So, and I came up with a term which nobody understood, autoepistemic limitation. So why? So auto is clear, self-referential, autoepistemic. We are not able to perceive this spatial temporal structure by itself as such, meaning it transforms into something else, into a phenomenal feature. Yeah, but we cannot perceive the electrical discharges and the molecules and the movements also of molecules as such. That's what I call physical and then also phenomenological autoepistemic limitation. Since nobody understood that, I dropped it. But in my earlier books, and in 2000, I think the neuropsychoanalysis book, you see a whole chapter on that. And then I dropped it because nobody's understood and said, you're crazy. We don't know what you mean. And now it's coming back to me, not only because of this question, but I'm not daring to picking it up because it's just the resistance is too big. But I think it's a key question. So meaning, and that's for me almost an irony, it's an epistemological deficit. It's an insufficiently, which underlies as a necessary condition, if I'm right, our ability to have mental states and makes that distinction. So I'm talking here not on an ontological, epistemological level. Yeah. So that's, and I think has a key role for any kind of epistemology. Yeah. An empirical, I think I can nowadays, I would be able to give also an empirical mechanism why that is so necessarily so, because you want the necessity in there, because then it becomes philosophical. Yeah. So I would, the claim is strong, the load is on my end. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the brain has an intrinsic feature that makes it impossible not to make that distinction. Yeah. There's almost an epistemological irony in there.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Prof. Norghoff. I think I see there are many questions on the Zoom, and also people want to ask questions here. I think this is another reason why we have to keep you here, and or to bring you back here. And at the end of this professorial lecture here, this was a very deep and very informative work and lecture of Prof. Norghoff. I think he spent a lot of time thinking and experiencing and doing these things. I think what is wonderful here, you see ideas and views not just based on philosophical and epistemological and ontological thinking and speculations, but backed by real psychiatric and empirical and scientific thinking and work. I think that's wonderful. It's really, just to summarize in the end of our lecture today, as he said very rightly, that he is working in the context where he is working, and he defines the terms and the operationalizes the things based on that reality, that context, that model. And from my own simple perspective, I think that's why he finds a lot of critique from that context. But to us, and from my perspective, he is actually heading to come out from that model of the, I think he added already one important perspective when he included scientifically the concept of world in his formula, moving brain, body, and now the world is that. The way how he defines world, it's depend on the context, depend on the epistemology and the ontology that he is using. From our perspective as Muslims, I think Professor Osman Bakar and Professor Jasir Auda just mentioned, for us, we cannot understand the reality. We cannot understand the human. We cannot understand the world without these three layers or dimension phenomena. The human, where you talk about brain or heart or soul or whatever, and then the world, where we talk about the cosmos, and God. It's impossible in an Islamic epistemology and philosophy to interpret and explain all this phenomenon without these three. It is all the dynamics and integration between God, man, and the world. And what comes from God is the revealed knowledge. And that revealed knowledge is the one who creates your relation, or the relation between the brain, the world, and the human, and the rest of the creation. So that's why I say that what he is doing compared to what is there in the last 200 years in the West, from the positivistic, from the rationalistic, the materialistic, the Derrida, Foucault, I think what this great man is doing is something new. in that context. That's why we really appreciate his effort, and we will do our best to have him in more occasions and times to deliver his views and ideas, and we take it from there. Thank you, Prof. May God bless you. Okay. In the end of this Istac-World Professorial Lecture number 26, before we end our session today, we will be giving a token of appreciation to our professor, and also we will have a photo session here with him, and then we end our session. With this, I would like to thank all the people who are in the Zoom and the YouTube channel there. Thank you very much for participating, staying with us all this long time, with all this very deep kind of a content that you consume today. I think for myself, I need 6 months from now to digest, and I will come back to you telling you some other new ideas. So may Allah bless you all. Thank you very much for everybody, the people who are here, the people who are on the Zoom and the YouTube channel. Thank you very much. All of us, we thank Professor Norghoff for his really important lecture to all of us. With this, I can thank you all, and those on the Zoom, whether we give you the freedom to stay or to leave. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa
I
barakatuh.
will never zoom in here. Yeah.
This is your name already here. This is our certificate acknowledging that you have delivered this picture. We have also some publications here, some books about